The oppressive silence, the lingering smell of ashes, and the constant presence of death make it a job that few can endure for long. But for those who stay, there's something even more unsettling than dealing with the dead. What happens when the flames go out? I was never the type to believe in the supernatural. When I landed a job at a small-town crematory, I thought it would be a lonely but uneventful job, just following protocols, turning on the furnaces and making sure everything was clean at the end of the shift. But I soon realized something was wrong with that place. During my first week, I noticed small details I couldn't explain. Tools I was sure I had left in one place would appear somewhere else. The cremation furnace doors would open on their own, even though they were locked. But what truly disturbed me was what I heard one silent night, coming from inside an unused furnace. A faint clicking sound, followed by something that almost sounded like a whisper. I froze, trying to make sense of it. I opened the furnace door, expecting to find some kind of mechanical issue, but everything was in order. The scent of burning still clung to the hot metal, and for a brief moment I felt something cold brush against my hand. The next day, I mentioned it to a more experienced colleague. He just laughed and told me that every long-time employee had their own stories about what happened there. Fire purifies the body, but it doesn't always take everything with it, he said, offering no further explanation. Over time, I began to notice that certain bodies came with something different. Some, even after the cremation process, left behind darker, almost oily ashes. Others seemed to cause unexplained malfunctions in the equipment. But the worst experience happened on a winter night when I was assigned a solo shift. The last body of the night was an elderly man who, according to the documents, had no family. His pale face seemed to hold an empty stare, even in death. I placed the casket in the furnace and started the cremation, but instead of the usual sound of flames consuming wood and flesh, I heard something that froze me to my core. A knock. At first weak, then stronger. It was as if something inside the furnace was trying to get out. My heart pounded. I knew it wasn't possible. The process had already started. But the knocking continued, now accompanied by a muffled scream. I told myself it was just the wood cracking, the heat warping the coffin structure. But then, the voice became clear. Someone was calling for help. I stepped back, shaking. My instincts screamed for me to shut everything down, open the door, and check. But my mind told me it was impossible. No one could be alive in there. Then, just as my hand reached for the emergency stop button, the sound stopped. Complete silence. The furnace finished its cycle without further interruptions. But when I opened the door to collect the ashes, I felt a presence behind me. I saw nothing, but the air around me grew dense, heavy. A cold whisper brushed against my ear, though I couldn't make out the words. The next morning, as I cleaned up the remains, I found something that should have never been there. Among the ashes, there was a handprint, a hand burned into the metal, as if someone had tried to escape from inside the furnace. I stood there, staring at the handprint burned into the metal, my stomach twisting. It was impossible. The furnace reached such extreme temperatures that nothing should have remained but ashes. But the mark was there, unmistakable. 5 fingers stretched out, as if someone had pressed their hand against the scorching surface. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just some strange residue, a flaw in the metal. But the longer I looked, the more I felt something was wrong. The air around me seemed to hum slightly, as if an invisible presence was waiting for me to do something. I took a deep breath and finished cleaning as quickly as possible. But that night, as I tried to sleep, I felt a weight on my chest, like someone was sitting on me, preventing me from breathing. My room was dark, but I had the overwhelming sensation that I was not alone. In the corner of the room, a shadowy figure began to take shape. It had no face, no distinct body, but I knew it was watching me. I shut my eyes, trying to ignore it, but the pressure on my chest grew heavier. Then, I heard a whisper near my ear, a raspy voice, barely recognizable, but with a clear message. "Why didn't you take me out?" My eyes flew open instantly. My body was paralyzed, pinned by the invisible weight. The shadow in the corner of the room seemed to move, slowly approaching me. I wanted to scream, wanted to run, but I was completely frozen. It wasn't until the first rays of sunlight pierced through the window that everything vanished. The weight lifted, the shadow dissolved, and I could finally move again. I jumped out of bed, drenched in cold sweat. That morning, I decided I would never return to the crematory. I gathered my things and called my supervisor, making up some excuse to quit. But before leaving town for good, I was overcome by a strange impulse. I needed to see that handprint one last time. I went back to the crematory in the middle of the night. The building was locked, but I managed to get inside unnoticed. Holding my breath, I walked toward the furnace, expecting to find the same mark on the metal surface. But it was gone. The metal was completely smooth, with no trace of what I had seen before. I ran my fingers over the cold surface, trying to understand. Then, in the absolute silence of the crematory, I heard a sound coming from the storage area. The sound of a coffin lid being opened. My heart pounded. The sound echoed through the empty crematory, making the air around me feel heavier. I froze in place, my ears straining for any other noise. But silence returned. The only sound now was my own breathing, short and unsteady. My mind searched for a logical explanation. Maybe it was just the natural shifting of the wooden coffins stacked in the storage area. Maybe a rat or the building settling. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. Every step I took toward the storage room seemed to echo louder than it should. The narrow hallway felt longer than I remembered, and the dim sensor lights flickered, as if something was interfering with them. When I finally reached the door, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to turn back, to forget any of this was happening. But the other part, the one already in too deep, needed to see. I pushed the door open slowly. The room was cold, far colder than the rest of the building. The scent of wood chemicals and something faintly metallic filled my nose. Sealed coffins were lined up in neat rows, waiting for their final moment in the furnace. But one of them was open. A shiver ran down my spine. The lid wasn't just ajar. It had been pushed aside, as if something inside had forced its way out. My instincts screamed for me to turn around, to leave and never look back. But my feet kept moving forward. The open coffin sat at an odd angle. The lid, lying beside it, still rocked slightly, as if it had been disturbed just moments ago. I gripped the small flashlight in my coat pocket and aimed it inside. It was empty, but the velvet lining inside wasn't smooth like the others. There were marks, scratches, deep grooves where nails had dug into the fabric, as if someone had fought desperately to get out. My stomach churned. This didn't make sense. No coffin arrived here with a living body. I knew the procedures. Everything went through inspections. What I was seeing should not be possible. And then I felt it, a shift in the air, the same suffocating weight I had felt in my room the night before. The temperature dropped drastically, and a strange odor filled the space. It wasn't just the usual scent of wood, ashes, and chemicals. It was something rancid, like burnt flesh mixed with decay. Then I heard it, a slow, dragging sound, something scraping against the tiled floor. My flashlight shook in my hand, the beam flickering as I aimed it toward the dark corners of the room. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might pass out. And then, in the absolute silence of the crematory, a weak voice whispered my name. It shouldn't have been possible, but it was real. I whipped the flashlight around frantically, searching for the source of the voice, but there was nothing, just the long shadows of the coffins and the darkness creeping in closer by the second. My body screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to move. Then I noticed it. The coffin lid, which had been lying on the floor moments ago, had shifted. It was closer now, as if something or someone was trying to close it again. My heart nearly stopped as I felt a cold breath against the back of my neck. And then, with a sharp snap, the storage room door slammed shut on its own. The loud bang of the door slamming shut echoed through the narrow room, sending a shiver down my entire body. The air felt heavier, thick with something unseen but undeniably there. My chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths as my eyes darted across every corner of the room, desperately searching for a rational explanation. But logic no longer had a place here. The coffin lid moved again, a low, slow creak, like something on the other side was trying to shut it completely. I stepped back, but something inside me screamed that if I let the lid close, something far worse would happen. Forcing myself to move forward, I gripped the flashlight in my trembling hands. With the other hand, I grabbed the coffin lid and pulled it back, opening it completely. The weight in the air deepened, and an icy chill spread through the room. That's when I saw it. On the coffin's velvet lining, where before there had only been scratch marks, there was now something else. Letters, a phrase, hastily scribbled into the worn fabric. The words were jagged, distorted, as if they had been etched by desperate hands. But they were clear enough to read. Don't let him take me. My blood ran cold. I stumbled away from the coffin, my eyes wide, my heart hammering against my ribs. Who had written that? And more importantly, who was him? Before I could react, I felt it. A sudden tug on the back of my shirt, like invisible fingers clenching around the fabric, holding me in place. The suffocating weight in the air intensified, and the strange smell became unbearable. Rancid, burnt, rotting. My flashlight started to flicker, and then I saw it. In the darkness of the farthest corner, something moved. It wasn't a normal shadow. It wasn't the reflection of any object. It was a form that seemed to swallow what little light remained, like a walking void. Tall, gaunt, with no distinct features, but an overwhelming presence. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but my body wouldn't move. The figure stood there for a moment, watching me, studying me. Then my flashlight cut out completely, and the world went black. In the next instant, I felt a crushing pressure on my chest, like something was pulling me down. My mind screamed, struggling to stay conscious, but it was as if something was draining me. Then, suddenly, a sound shattered the darkness. The crematory's front doorbell rang. The pressure vanished instantly. My flashlight flickered back to life. Without thinking, I spun around and ran, sprinting towards the door without daring to look back. My heart pounded violently as I reached the main hallway. The building looked exactly the same, as if nothing had happened. But I knew it wasn't my imagination. I knew what I had felt. I knew what I had seen. I burst out of the crematory, not even bothering to lock the door behind me. I never went back. Days later, I heard someone else had taken my old position. He lasted only a week before quitting without explanation. Some say he heard strange things. Others say he saw something. But one thing is certain. In that crematory, fire may consume the bodies, but it doesn't always take everything with it.